We'll continue the second half with Brian's Sky Notes for November. Take it away, Brian.
Thank you. I'll have to wander back and forwards to change slides, but that's not a problem. I'll apologise, it doesn't seem to be filling the screen, but I don't usually use this laptop for PowerPoint. It's got LibreOffice on it, so I don't really want to try and start changing the appearance of the screen just now. It'll take me ages. So hopefully you can still see that. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll move across this way a little bit so you can see as well. So into November Sky Notes for the next month. I'll start off with the sun as before. This is the sun as it was today, so there's not really very much going on. Interestingly enough, having had quite a lot of activity in the sun over the past few weeks and months, it's actually gone relatively quiet, although there is a new region just beginning to appear around the limb, which was responsible for some flaring earlier on today, so hopefully that might generate a little bit more activity. But most of the other spots that have been passing over the past few days are actually quite small and not terribly active groups. It's a bit weird seeing such a spotless sun.
Hey Brian, is that group responsible for one of those huge flares that we saw a few days ago? There was two ginormous flares.
Oh yes, yeah. I don't think it was the one here that's just appeared. There is one that's a little bit more active over on this side, so I'm not sure. I think one of the flares that occurred actually was it wasn't a spot region, it was just a kind of active area, so there wasn't anything obviously there. So I'm not sure which one it was for that.
We'll wait.
So we'll see if once that comes around a little bit. But the sun, in terms of what we see the sun, I'll start at the bottom here, because of course British summertime ends this Sunday, so the clocks will go back, so we'll be able to observe a little bit earlier in the evening. So whereas most people moan about darker nights, of course it's all great, I can't wait for the clocks to change. So you can see that from the 1st of November next week, the sun's setting in about 4:30 in the afternoon, so it's dark quite early on. In the middle of the month, it's dark enough to observe from about 5:30 right through until 6:30 in the morning. So plenty of observing time, and it's actually still dark relatively late on in the morning for those pre-dawn observations as well. And then by the end of November, we've got the sun setting well before 4 o'clock, so a nice early dark period. The moon, I don't know why I put this image up, I'll change it from what I had last time, but in fact it's probably not a very good image of the moon to use this month, because this is the phase that we don't really see very well at this time of year, because the ecliptic is running so close to the horizon in the evening after sunset. It's almost first quarter, I think, before the moon gets high enough up to see well. It's certainly about 4 or 5 days after new before it's really visible at all at the moment. So we do have to stay a little bit later into the lunar cycle to be able to see the moon particularly well. We've got full moon tomorrow night, which I'll come back to in a moment, but during November, it's last quarter early in the month, so week and Sunday we've got last quarter, which is then nice and high in the sky, actually rising over the northeast quite late in the evening rather than the early morning, and then nice and high in the south at dawn. So if you do want to do any good lunar imaging, it really involves getting up in the early hours. Ken keeps reminding us at this time that it is possible to carry on observing even into after sunrise too, with the use of filters can help with that. But again, we're still in that stage of the waning moon being best to see this month. We've got new moon on the 13th. It's, as I say, quite a few, I think I probably reckon it was about the 17th or 18th before you'll be able to see the moon particularly well down the south west and south by that stage. So it takes a little while before it begins to pick up. Around about first quarter it's getting slightly higher, and then as we get into the gibbous phases between first quarter and full moon, it will be a bit more obvious in the evening, and then we've got full moon right at the end of the month on the 27th. So I didn't actually, I didn't feel like Ken in advance whether you were going to say anything about the moon specifically.
No, as I said last time, Brian, the sky notes you put out with the moon notes, I've just indicated a few interesting features through the month. I tried to cover the month in a more general way, hoping people will come back with his observations. Yeah. So look at Brian's sky notes when they come out. There's some tips on what to look for.
Yeah. So we can, hopefully hopefully we'll get some lunar observations as well that we can talk about after the meetings. But I want to say a little bit about the full moon tomorrow night. This is the view at, interestingly enough, 2038 BST, 1938 UT. Looking towards the east, the full moon is actually quite close to Jupiter tomorrow evening. So it's Jupiter here, here's the moon. I've chosen this particular time because there is something interesting happening tomorrow night. As you may well know, there's a partial eclipse of the full moon tomorrow evening. So this is the time, just the start of just into the start of the eclipse. So the moon's still quite low, it's about 25 degrees or so up over in the east. I don't know whether we're going to see anything or not, obviously the weather's not particularly good at the moment. I think the forecast for tomorrow suggests it's going to be slightly showery, so there may be potentially breaks in the cloud over the course of the evening, but they're probably not going to be very extensive, and it probably depends where you are. I think over Fife around into Perthshire looks a bit more likely for any breaks where you might get to see anything, so I don't know if we're going to see anything like this or not. But anyway, I'll mention it just so you're prepared. Should you want to look out at during this time. So it starts at 1935 UT, which is 2035 BST, since we're still on it for a few more hours at this stage. So the Earth's shadow appears over in the bottom left of the moon, and then at maximum eclipse at about 9 BST. There's not really very much, it's about between 5 and 6% of the moon area is covered. There's slightly more than I mentioned in my moon notes. Obviously nobody noticed the fact that my deliberate error last time, but I had it in my head it was 3%, which is what I put in the notes, but it's slightly more than that, although not that I think 3% or 6% doesn't really make an awful lot of difference. It's a fairly small eclipse of the moon, and then roughly an hour after the start, at 21:53 BST, the shadow's disappearing again, so the moon's just clipping the top of that. So it's not a particularly great eclipse. We're probably not going to see it anyway. We've got to wait a little while before there's a couple of totals in 2025, but they are interrupted by either moonrise or moonset, so we don't get to see it all. It's 2029 before we actually get a total eclipse of the moon that is uninterrupted throughout the evening. So sadly, over the next few years we don't do terribly well with lunar eclipses. We're sticking with the moon partly at the moment. On the morning of Thursday, November the 9th, there's at this point, a very close conjunction with the moon and Venus. So this is Venus here, where they're just over a degree apart. So this is 6 AM, so it's into UT now, since we're into November.
Right.
So it's 6 o'clock in the morning, it's still fairly dark, but this is what you'll see. Obviously the objects rise earlier, so if you are up earlier in the morning, you may well still be able to see the moon and Venus, but gradually they're getting closer together as the moon is moving in this direction towards Venus, getting closer. So it will look very nice as a photo opportunity in the dawn sky, but in fact, a few hours later, the moon does actually occult Venus during the day, so it's a daytime occultation at around about 9:45 UT for Dundee. So the moon by this stage we're about 35 degrees up, so it's quite high in the south. And you see that Venus disappears down in the lower left, and then reappears roughly an hour later across here. So certainly Venus is bright enough to see during the day. Crescent moon's bright enough to see in a nice blue sky, particularly if it's transparent. So if you have a telescope, you should be able to observe the occultation. You may even be able to see it in binoculars. I've seen daytime occultations of Venus in a telescope. I've never actually tried with binoculars before, so I don't know. I know it's easy to see on other occasions both the crescent moon and Venus separately. Whether the bright edge of the moon will make it difficult to see Venus as it disappears, I don't know, but worth trying. But hopefully, again, fingers crossed, if we get a nice clear sky on the morning of the 9th, there's this opportunity to have a daytime occultation. Since it is a nice bright planet as well to see. So Venus, I should say, I wasn't going to say any more about Venus, but Venus at the moment is very well placed in the sky. It's at gibbous phase, it's just slightly past being half, so it's gradually moving away from us again, getting smaller and becoming more full as it moves away. But it's still rising well over 4 hours ahead of the sun, about 4 hours 40 minutes. So it's up early in the early hours of the morning and very high up by the time it gets to dawn. So it's very easy to see, so it's quite nice to have an additional event involving Venus at the moment. Jupiter, as you all know, is also very bright at the moment too. It's at opposition this month on the 3rd, at the end of next week. It's magnitude -2.9, so being at opposition opposite the sun, it will be nice and high in the south at midnight. So it's gradually becoming easier to observe, and imaging will be much better with it being much higher in the sky and away from all that turbulence. But not far from Jupiter and Scout, it's about 11 degrees, so just a bit over a fist's width at arm's length. We've also got Uranus. It's at opposition on the 13th, 10 days later. So it's quite nice that they're relatively close together in the sky. So if you want to look for Uranus, if you've not seen it in binoculars, it's very easy to see. It's at magnitude 5.6, so it's fairly bright. This image just gives us a wider area of sky, so you see the Pleiades and the head of Taurus here, Auriga, and Orion just coming up, but a slightly close-up view as well, which is slightly easier perhaps to see Uranus. Just marked just in there. So it's about halfway roughly between Jupiter and the Pleiades, just slightly south of a line joining the two, although you will need to have a star mapper of some kind to help identify, because it's still sort of faint enough that there's some other stars of similar brightness around that area. But it's always worth tracking down Uranus around, especially with Jupiter so nearby. Other planets, well, we're not going to see Mercury this month. It's technically in the evening sky, but it's setting so soon after the sun that it's not really visible. Mars is also in conjunction with the sun during November, so it's right on the far side, so we're not going to see Mars either. Saturn is still on view in the south in the evenings. It's about 7 o'clock in the evening, middle of the month. So Saturn's highest is about 20 degrees up in the south, so it's still pretty low. From where I am, it just clears the rooftops and treetops. And because it is above roofs of relatively near neighbours, the seeing conditions aren't usually very good, because in the evening there's lots of turbulence coming up off the buildings. But sometimes it can give quite a nice appearance when looked at visually. We've also got Neptune in that part of the sky too, in Aquarius. If you're tempted to look for it, Neptune is possibly moving into Pisces from Aquarius. It was at opposition back in September, so a little bit past opposition for it now, but still it's about magnitude 7.8, it can be picked up in binoculars too. So that's the planet. I'll say a little bit about the stars as well. This is the star map for November. So we've got the summer constellations are still visible, so this is for 9 o'clock in the evening in the middle of the month. So we have the summer triangle, Vega, Deneb and Altair over in the west by that time of the evening. Altair of course will set later on. Vega and Deneb are both circumpolar from Dundee, so later in the night they actually get quite low around towards the north, as they do later in the year as well. So January, February they're quite low, but they do still stay above the horizon. But we're seeing some of the winter constellations now rising a little bit earlier, so by 9 PM in the middle of the month, Gemini is fully up over in the northeast, and we've got Orion almost completely above the horizon as well. This, I think I've actually used it is that last November's? I see Mars is marked on it. Anyway, we're looking at the stars, so it doesn't really matter. I just spotted the word Mars there. Jupiter and Uranus look quite close together. It's maybe just that I've left a label on there to create these maps myself. But in the south we've got this area of, well, not terribly many bright stars, but the autumn constellations are quite well on view. We've got Aquarius, where Saturn is not really terribly obvious constellations, little pattern of the water jar, Y shape there, which is quite obvious. Square of Pegasus up into Andromeda is quite easy to see. In the huge empty space down to the lower left of Pegasus is Cetus the whale, which is, the overall pattern I find is quite distinctive, but the stars themselves aren't terribly bright, so it's not always easy to recognise the particular pattern. Right up overhead though we've got the Milky Way, so it's still in quite a good position, rising from the west and going right overhead through Cassiopeia and Perseus, and then setting again over towards the east. So in the first half of the night anyway, if you don't mind looking straight up overhead, the Milky Way is quite easy to spot. Another star that I always like to look out for at this time of the year is Fomalhaut in the constellation of Pisces Astrunnus, the southern fish, which you can find directly down the right-hand side of the square of Pegasus. We follow these stars down from the square. You'll find it, it's very low. It gets to about 4 degrees above the horizon at its highest in the south, but it is the furthest south of the first magnitude stars that you can see from Dundee. So it's, I think it's overhead at Cape Town, latitude of Cape Town, so you can just see it no more. You do need with only 4 degrees up, obviously you do need a quite clear horizon towards the south. You can see it quite well from here at the Mills in the balcony. I saw it earlier in the week, one of those rare occasions which night it was clear, it Sunday night, from the beach at Broughty Ferry, looking over towards Tetsmere. There was quite a low horizon as well. So as a kind of naked eye challenge, I would probably offer Fomalhaut if you've got a good horizon to be able to see that. But just a few other deep sky objects as well to highlight. Have a look out for a mixture of naked, that's a good naked eye one, some binocular and telescopic objects. If we concentrate in that area around the square of Pegasus, Andromeda, we've also got here, this is Triangulum. So I've drawn some lines in here just to make it a bit easier to see. And then this is Aries. And a few other stars, these are all part of Aries as well, but this little triangle is the most obvious part of Aries to see. So obviously, looking up towards Andromeda, the most obvious object to have a look at this time of year is the Andromeda Galaxy, M31, which is just up there. So I'm going to move in, so you remember the kind of patterns here, because the next illustrations I've not used any lines on, because I find it a bit distracting. If we look into Andromeda, this is the corner star of the. If I look at that, no, sorry, that's not the corner. The square is actually further along. So this is the first star in from the corner star. Then I've got the 2 stars of Andromeda running along here, Beta and Gamma. So here's the Andromeda Galaxy, M31, which everyone will have looked at ad infinitum. So I probably don't need to say an awful lot about that. It's obviously potentially visible to the naked eye, which I find it quite hard these days. I don't know if it's just because my eyesight's getting bad as I get older, or whether it's the light pollution is getting worse, where I'm probably a combination of the two. But unless M31 is quite high up, I do find it a bit tricky to see. But if you're looking in that general direction, if you have binoculars, a good challenge is to spot M32, the companion galaxy, or the brighter of the 2 companion galaxies. The one is M110, which is on this side. But M32 is this little one up here, which I will circle so you see it a little bit better. It's 8th magnitude, so it's not terribly bright, but it's easy to see in binoculars. It looks star-like. It's slightly larger. If you've got maybe a pair of 80mm binoculars or bigger, you can begin to see it looking a little bit fuzzy and less star-like, but even at lower magnifications and apertures with binoculars, it is possible to see it, although it's helpful to have a star chart as well, so you can just make sure that it is M32 that you're looking at. It looks star-like. So that's a kind of binocular challenge. Another interesting object in Andromeda that you can have a look at, it's not the Andromeda Galaxy, is a star cluster NGC 752, an open cluster, which is over on this side of the constellation. It's not visible to the naked eye. It shows up reasonably well in binoculars. It's quite spread out. It's got 100 stars altogether. Most of them are faint, but in the field of view binoculars you can usually recognise that slightly larger grouping. And then the brightish object you can see just down here is actually 2 stars close together. It's a nice binocular double, just on the edge of the cluster, although not actually related to the cluster itself. Circle around that. This is the star 56 Andromedae, which is 2 yellow stars about 5th magnitude, roughly the same colour, roughly the same brightness. So they look really nice in binoculars, far enough apart to see quite easily in binoculars. And if you like double stars, a nice telescopic one in Andromeda is Gamma Andromedae, the 2nd magnitude star here along at the end of the row of bright stars that runs along from the square of Pegasus. It's a yellow star, quite obvious to the naked eyes, being yellowish in binoculars. It stands out, the colour comes out quite nicely. But in the telescope you can see that it's got a very close bluish companion, about 5th magnitude. 5th magnitude. So it's a nice colour contrast with those stars. So that's a very pretty telescopic double to look at. And then going down a little bit further, so I've had to zoom out because I wanted to keep M31 in this one as well. Here's M31 up here. Here's our star now at the end of the square of Pegasus, running along down here. This is the pattern of Triangulum. In here, the stars, again, binoculars that look good freeze, it looks quite nice there. But if you come down from the Andromeda Galaxy, down towards Beta Andromedae, and then about the same distance again, down here we have M33, the other bright, large galaxy in the local group, apart from the Andromeda Galaxy in the Milky Way. It's published brightness is quite bright, it's about 56 magnitude, but it's we're looking at it face on. So unlike M31, where we're looking edge on at the galaxy and looking through some continuous build-up of stars that makes it seem a bit brighter, we're looking face on at M33, so that it's quite low surface area, meaning surface brightness, so it makes it a bit more tricky to see. I have seen it in binoculars, even as small as 7x50 binoculars. Again, I'm not sure if my eyesight, sky conditions are really up to that these days, but if you have a fairly transparent sky, it's not too difficult to see, and it's relatively easy to find just by going the opposite way from the star. Instead of going up that way to the Andromeda Galaxy, come down this way to M33. So another challenging object for binoculars. And then finally, another double star for telescopes. If we go further down, here's Triangulum again, up here, M33, just up there. This is Aries, down here, Alpha or Hamal there, but down here at the end of that little triangle of Aries, this is another double star, it's a Gamma, Gamma Arietis, which has two nice, again, they're about 4th magnitude stars, both white, and they're identical if you look at it through the telescope. They're both white, both about the same brightness, nicely split in small telescopes. It's another really attractive double to look at. So if you are going to actually look up at that part of the sky, don't just think about the Andromeda Galaxy as being what's in that area. There are lots of other interesting things to look at in that part of the sky as well. Even though when you look up at it with the naked eye, it tends to look quite empty and blank. So there we go, that's some of the highlights to look out for over the coming month. Obviously the physical sky notes will be coming out to you shortly, and you'll be able to any questions?
Can I ask a naive question? Because I've never done any observations myself. I was curious. I've done a lot of science with the star clusters, global clusters.
Yes.
Can you observe any of them with these kind of telescopes? And, do they look
Open
nice?
clusters?
Yeah.
Yes, open and global clusters. Yes, you can see quite a few. Obviously more.
Do they resolve them into stars, or just look fuzzy?
Some of the closer open clusters you can resolve with binoculars. So there are quite a few Perseus. There's M34 Perseus, double cluster in Perseus.
Yeah. I think globulars are quite a bit further away.
Globulars, you can resolve the outer edges in reasonable sized telescopes. There's M15 in Pegasus.
Which is actually quite a dense one.
Which is
one of the densest clusters.
Yeah, some of the ones like M13 and Hercules, I've seen that with the 10-inch telescope here, quite well resolved. The outer edges of that resolved into individual stars. So you can usually begin to see the fuzziness dying out as you at the outer edge. In binoculars you can see, well M13 obviously is visible, but M15 in Pegasus is visible in binoculars as well. But it's really just a small fuzzy patch. You can tell it's not a star, but that's really about it.
Because it was kind of interesting enough. Some of them have names suggesting that they were first thought to be stars, like Omega Centauri, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually the most luminous cluster. That's just Omega, right?
Yeah, that's
the faintest star that they were able to observe in Centaurus.
Yeah, because you wonder whether they just labelled it because it was a bright object, visible, it's visible to the naked eye, rather than necessarily thinking it was something that was just another star at the time, because I'm sure that it's got a fuzzy nature was probably apparent.
Even with the naked eye, it does look.
Yeah, it's a bit like, I suppose, with the messy objects as well. That's,
how do you know that?
The general story.
Or why?
Sorry?
Because they don't twinkle, or how do you know that they're fuzzy? Or do you actually see that?
We actually see that.
Yeah, Omega Centauri. When I was down in Australia, it looked a bit like looking at M31 naked eye. You could tell that it wasn't really a star. It had a kind of a fuzziness about it. But through binoculars, it was gorgeous.
Yeah, because Mezzi, he was cataloguing things that he thought he might confuse with comets, but then he also included things like M31, M45 the Pleiades, M44 the Persepi in Cancer, which are obvious even to the naked eye as being clusters of stars. But it was kind of for completeness. It was obviously just I thought, yes, I'll round it up, so I'll throw in some of these other things that are non-stellar in a sense. I mean, obviously they're stars, but they're not individual stars. So maybe they included Omega Centauri just because it was a kind of completeness of the constellation.
Just to get rid of it. From public researches.
Okay,
Right.
fine.
Has anybody got anything? Oh, Alan wants to.
Well, have you got 5 minutes for a few pictures?
Yeah, can we use your laptop for that, Mike?
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Yeah, you're interested in aircraft. Are you interested in aircraft? Aircraft, are you interested in aircraft? Are you? Yeah, so you were thinking. Served me when I was 18. My friend and I used to fly one of these. From Scotland. Fly down the Dundee. You're a better He flies and I fly back.
Just.
That's me.
Oh, Bill, yes, definitely Bill. What's the cable will be coming out there? This is a call back to one of our speakers last
off
year.
the top of my head which one it is.
I don't know.
Yeah, that looks like a bad chapel. That's the thing with 7822.
Sorry,
Shows
Bill.
it as high.
Sorry.
Andrew Allen's talk last year. Andrew's got a website called scotlandnightsky.com. He's also on Facebook as Scotland's Night Sky, on Instagram as Andrew Allen 22, on TikTok as Scotland's Night Sky, and other symbols that I don't recognise. Anyway, he's a very, very accomplished photographer of aurora, noctilucent cloud, you name it. And he goes to exotic locations like Glencoe. He lives in Perth, but good night, I'll go to Glencoe. The cover is Orion rising above Bucklet of Moor there, which is quite impressive. The photographs in it are as remarkable for the foregrounds as they are for the star fields and so on. That's Milky Way over Loch Morlich. Another place that he just nipped up to for the evening. He's actually got a bed in his car, so. And the topics he covers, I'll just read out well, he talks about basic stuff like seasons, weather, dark skies and light pollution, the Milky Way, constellations, the moon, northern lights, noctilucent clouds, zodiacal light, planets, star trails, International Space Station, meteor showers, astrophotography equipment. He's talking about DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. Settings for astro photography, editing astro images, useful apps, Facebook groups and websites, locations for stargazing in Scotland. Dundee's very good because we've got more clear nights than anybody else. A monthly calendar, meteor showers, all that sort of stuff, and then author biography, just tells you about himself. So he's selling this, it just came out last week, $19.99 plus postage, and to find it is scotlandsnightsky.com/book. Quite easy to remember. So I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Good.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. I think he's certainly an enthusiastic speaker when he came to show us his wonderful pickies. So, anything else? Anybody? Anything else? Oh, okay, well, we'll call the meeting to a halt then, have a close. And hopefully June will be back next time to give you a more civilised introduction to things.
It's all across the boat.
Yes. But yes, thank you everyone, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time for some James Webb magic.
Thanks, Dennis.